Greetings, dear friends. Your support is our strength. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. This helps the growth of our channel. Write comments, because feedback is very valuable to us. And now to the most relevant world news. Let's go. Zelensky's visit to Macron turned into a session of self-exposure, reports the Global Look press agency. During his 2-day visit to France and participation in the summit of Ukraine's allies, Volodymyr Zelensky was cheerful and lively, as always, probably under the influence. At the same time, he said things that make your ears wilt. And they will cost him dearly, including in Ukraine. The bill for these talks will come not only from Moscow, but also from Washington. Volodymyr Zelensky's trip to Paris resembled the last tour of an artist in places where he is still appreciated. The host side, represented by Emmanuel Macron, pretended as if Ukraine was the center of the world. They went all out in terms of special effects. The Eiffel Tower, for example, was lit up in yellow and blue, in reference to, obviously, whose flag. But, as is often the case with France and always with Macron, the grand form is meant to conceal the meagerness of the content. For instance, the French leader solemnly announced that he had found an additional 2 billion euros and would send them for military support to Ukraine. That's how it is. And when last year the Americans gave Zelensky $60 billion, there was much less fuss about it. For some reason. In other words, Macron's handout won't last long given Ukraine's appetites. But the blue and yellow tower will be remembered by the French. And there's not much else to remember. Well, that's the Frenchman with the Ukrainian. The same old dreary repertoire, and yet they hinted there would be a breakthrough, innovation, a super bomb. France, along with Britain, is supposed to send a military contingent to Ukrainian territory, like in that Crimean War, but it's called a peacekeeping mission. Accordingly, peacekeeping in quotes. And therefore, the whole idea is that Franco-British troops, with the support of some Swedes, will appear in Ukraine if hostilities end and at least a temporary peace agreement is signed. And the whole subtlety is that Moscow has firmly, repeatedly, and categorically a word from the latest stated. On this topic, the Russian Foreign Ministry has commented, stating that it will not tolerate any NATO country contingents in Ukraine. If it is necessary to suspend the military operation for them to appear there, they will not suspend it any further. They are not even considering it. However, it is precisely towards this, if not peace, then at least a pause, that efforts are currently being directed. The President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, unexpectedly for many, he is extremely persistent. And Macron has stated that Ukraine is a sovereign state and can make its own decisions. As for foreign peacekeepers in quotes, but this is all complete nonsense. Being dependent on foreign support means it is not independent. And Ukraine is currently turning into a colony. It has been within these confines for a long time. And in decisions as well. Perhaps the French intend for Europeans to hear all this once more at the Russian-American negotiation table. Because it is very important to at least get to that table, even if just on the edge of a seat, to jostle for a place in world history. This is humiliating for their pride, especially for the French, for some reason. Publications in the global media on the eve of Zelensky's visit to Paris indirectly confirmed that this version of events is the correct one. For instance, the British newspaper The Telegraph, citing military personnel, wrote that Prime Minister Keir Starmer, to put it mildly, rushed by promising a military contingent to Ukraine. Where will he get it from with a 70,000-strong army? This is a political stance, not a concrete plan, which many reasons will prevent from being implemented in practice. At the same time, Reuters completely dismissed the idea of a contingent from the EU, stating, citing sources, that Brussels will look for other forms of assistance to Ukraine. And all because, without the organizational support of the United States, implementing the Peacekeeper Initiative is extremely difficult and simply dangerous. Putin might retaliate. And Trump has not promised any support and is generally not interested in supporting Europe. The day before, speaking about the EU, he literally stated the following: "Such allies are worse than enemies." Well, that's basically it. The comedy is over. However, Macron did not confirm the press's pessimistic assessments. He continues to pretend that the military mission of European countries in Ukraine is a real plan. There will supposedly be a contingent, one that can respond in case of any attack from Russia. However, there is still no clarity regarding the parameters of the contingent. Although Macron is pursuing this topic, they hold 2 summits a week, discuss, and negotiate. And after the latest one, which took place following negotiations with Zelensky, the next step of the European coalition was outlined. Thus, high-ranking French and British military officials will visit Ukraine to think, reflect on the mission format, and present their proposals. In other words, they poured water from one bucket into another again. And then they will pour it again, and not just once. The delegation will return, present a report, call a new summit, and they will scratch their heads again, and so on and so forth, all to buy time and assert their great significance. And why is Witkov hated by Ukraine? The new hero of Ukraine in the USA will not manage his glorious mission. Ukraine has a chance to break into the EU through Hungary. The Associated Press agency, allegedly familiar with the course of all these negotiations, states that if the European military contingent does go to Ukraine, it will be far from the combat zone. Very far. One option is its deployment along the Dnieper River, and another is in the west of Ukraine, somewhere near Lviv. So, French soldiers will be waiting somewhere far away, but in case of danger, they will immediately engage in battle and defeat the enemy. For generals from other countries like Russia, the USA, Britain, Germany, and even Poland, this would sound like a very funny joke throughout most of the 20th century. Yes, and it still sounds that way. The fact that the contingent is supposed to be stationed at a distance was personally confirmed by Macron at a joint press conference with none other than Zelensky. And Zelensky suddenly supported this distance, stating that no one wants to involve other countries in military actions. But this is also a lie. Zelensky tried to draw NATO into a direct military conflict with the Russian Federation. From the first day of the special operation, this was precisely the purpose of his demand to close the sky over Ukraine. That is why the demands were met. There was none in the West. Well, they were afraid. Subsequently, Kiev repeatedly changed tactics, used various tricks, but it always came down to one thing: to start a war between Russia and NATO, because only in this way can Ukraine win the current conflict. But it no longer matters that Zelensky is lying. He constantly lies. That's his job. I wonder why he suddenly became so cheerful. And indeed, it's as if he straightened up, started joking, became cheeky, even though his situation couldn't be worse. Perhaps he was cheered by the additional 11 billion euros found by the participants of the Paris summit, on top of the 2 billion from that fellow Macron. These are real funds. With proper savings, it can last until the end of the year. Zelensky's life philosophy is largely described by the phrase, "You die today, and I'll die tomorrow." His adherence to this philosophy is also confirmed by the ways of rudeness he has chosen for himself. For example, he stated that, in the current confrontation, one should bet on him, Zelensky, because he is significantly younger than the President of Russia, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. And regarding Russians in general, he even said that hatred towards them is one of the daily motives to act and live. I wonder, did he earn money with us? All of this was said during a meeting with representatives of the French press, during which he was more than usually carefree and cheerful. Zelensky was showing his very good mood. In the end, he relaxed so much, probably after some prohibited substances, that he revealed all his cards. He admitted that he agreed with the American idea of a truce, only so that Russia would reject this idea, redirecting Donald Trump's anger onto itself. Apparently, he believes that this scheme will work. Perhaps against all odds, he also believes in Macron and is waiting for the French contingent. With the intention of pitting them against the Russian army, I think he will be disappointed. But this joy is more of a nervous nature, not to say chemical. Sometimes it happens that a participant in negotiations suddenly steps out for a few minutes, let's say, to the restroom, and then returns noticeably more cheerful and talkative. It seems this is the case, and Zelensky too. What do you think, friends? It's clear that he's just carried away, that he no longer lies, but starts to tell implausible stories about how the main political advice comes from ordinary Ukrainians, with whom he communicates and consults on the streets. He stubbornly clings to the idea that it will be possible to sharply estrange Moscow from Washington again. And in Kiev, he will again be allowed to hope for the impossible victory over the Russian Federation. Ukraine has hope again, and hope is the last to die. And for such schemers as Zelensky, hope is never alone. And now again, he can be rude to the President of Russia, also counting on the fact that with him being so promising, in quotes, after this, they will not want to communicate out of principle. Well, is it really such an honor, or what is needed? At the same time, this person does not understand what he is doing, because he is burying himself and simplifying Russia, its strategic task. All these European schemes are more likely to lead to the escalation of this conflict between the EU and the USA rather than uniting the West around Ukraine. This is how it is needed now, and also to the point where an extremely angry Trump will eventually put Kiev on a starvation diet, until they get rid of Zelensky there. Insulting Putin because of his age, and Trump's special envoy Steve Whitaker because of what he... A developer, and according to Zelensky, usually answers questions like, where will the windows face? Zelensky's commander-in-chief forgets himself in the most fatal way. He forgot both that Trump is a developer himself and that he is 6, more than years older than Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and that with Whitaker, whose mission in Russia is deeply hated by Ukrainians, the US president has been friends for over 40 years. At such moments, it seems that in the current political intrigue, Russia needs only one thing personally from Zelensky, for him to talk a lot more and to step out for 5 minutes more often for a refill. The rest will be done by history itself.